Welcome everyone to our webinar this morning. We are here to learn more about the Confined Animal Feeding Operations program with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And we are joined today by Christopher Anderson. He's a Livestock Water Quality Specialist for ODA. And some of us refer to him as a CAFO inspector because he's one of the people in the state that will come out to properties to help them be in compliance with state laws related to the CAFO permit. And he also is here to provide education and advice. And that's a really wonderful opportunity for people to gain more information specifically for their property if they want to visit with Christopher directly. And today we're just so grateful that he would be willing to join us for this educational program. He has a presentation that he's going to share, and then we'll open it up for Q&A time after he's done. If you do have a question that's like you have to ask it right away, just pop it in the chat, and I will interrupt Chris if we need to. Otherwise, hold on to those questions, and there will be plenty of time after the short presentation for you to engage and learn what you need to know. Once again, thank you, Christopher, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, good morning, folks. As she said, I'm Chris Anderson. I'm a livestock water quality specialist. So apparently I'm trained to talk about things where livestock might impact our water quality. Been doing this since 2002. So we're going to start off with a quick primer on confined and concentrated animal feeding operations. So we'll get everybody on the same boat here. Having, owning, possessing livestock makes us an animal feeding operation, right? If you hold them in confinement for enough time, right, and you have wastewater, you can be the confined animal feeding operation. Now, if you look there, you see the citation. That's the Oregon administrative rules that define how we deal with confined animal feeding operations. And specifically, that citation will take you to the table we're going to talk about here in a minute that talks about the animal numbers that you need to hold in confinement. Now, this definition used to talk about holding animals on a prepared surface. Now we just talk about holding animals anywhere where it wouldn't have vegetation during the normal growing season. We're just trying to separate out pasture-based systems from confinement type systems. Okay, and so if you hold enough animals in confinement for 45 days, have a discharge to waters of the U.S., well, then those big capital CAFO letters apply to you, and that's that traditional large animal operation that we all think of when somebody talks about a CAFO. So those Division 74 CAFO rules I was talking about, that's where we get the definition of what a CAFO is. Now, this used to be a little bit more expansive because this definition used to suck a lot of people in because it used to just say any kind of wastewater control facility. Now we actually talk about a wastewater control facility that generates 100 gallons per day of some kind of wastewater. Of course, we do catch the folks in here that discharge into waters of the state, because discharge into waters of the state is what we're trying to prevent through all of these rules. It's all about protecting beneficial uses. And once again, at the bottom, our definition goes and includes the federal definition, because our program is responsible for regulating those folks that the feds deem CAFOs. So now that we have these new Division 74 rules, we have a number that's what we would call too small to require a permit. That means you don't need a CAFO permit. It doesn't mean that you don't need to comply with the rules. So don't discharge, don't negatively impact surface or groundwater. So as you can see in this table here, it defines what the small tier is. And if you're under the numbers in the small tier, that's the numbers that we consider too small to require a permit. Now you notice at the bottom, we have the other animal combination. A lot of operations in the too small tier actually fall down into here, because as long as you don't meet any one of the individual groups above, If you're a combined animal operation, we've got a 30 animal unit number that says that that generally is too small to require permit. So now we go to people that have waste systems that collect 100 gallons or more per day, and they are the ones that will require a permit. Anybody less than that will just be asked to please operate in such a way that you don't negatively impact beneficial uses. Okay, so people often ask, what is wastewater? And in 468B, that's the state law that defines water pollution and defines the water pollution control programs for the state. We have these definitions: waste, all the things that could get into water that might mess it up for other beneficial uses, and water. And they're pretty broad and pretty expansive, which was intended. Wastewater is a construct, and it's what results when our processes and our facilities allow the two to come together. It can happen in a lot of ways: uncovered animal holding areas, or washing up after we're done dealing with our animals or milking. So, one of the questions people talk about is, what's a system? System is totally dictated by the size and scope of an operation. It can be everything from a mop and bucket if we're tiny to a large lagoon to store our wastewater on bigger places. For solid waste, it can mean anything from a tarp that covers a pile that we have out in the field to a concrete floored covered manure storage that facilitates our handling and storage of manure. Size and management objectives totally determine the need. Um, all that we expect is containment during critical periods to prevent discharge to surface or groundwater that impact beneficial use. Um, so one of the other questions is nutrient management plans. These nutrient management plans are I mean, they're integral in trying to determine whether or not these rules apply, right? Because depending on your sources, the volumes and nutrient contents that would be estimated from your operation dictate whether or not, the rules apply. Okay, so in the nutrient management plan, we also have to talk about uses. And so we have kind of a circular planning effort here where we have to look at both the land management side for the use and the predicted weather to go with the facility side, which actually helps us finalize those volumes so that we can balance storage with critical periods. We don't want to have to go and pump out our tank in the middle of February onto a wet or saturated or frozen field. So, oh, sorry, went the wrong way. Now we get to planning resources. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of planning resources now. OSU and the other land grant universities provide us great guidance. All of their materials provide the references that we currently use in the state for our planning efforts. Them and our good partners at the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Their technical standards and their information in the field, what is it, the field office technical guide, are supporting documents for all management planning. Now, we have very few private consultants, and if there are ones that are working in the state today, our natural resource conservation partners should be able to tell you who they are. However, I advocate that the best planner on a small operation is the operator. You yourself know what you intend to do and how you intend to get it done. Um, we recommend that you start with our minimum required elements document, which is just an outline um, to help you address all the things that are general concerns on a confined animal feeding operation. And when you get the basic answers to those questions, we should be able to say, does the CAFO rule apply to me? And that can substantiate getting yourself the write up that says, hey, I'm a CAFO that doesn't require a permit in Oregon, to help you with your land use authorities in making sure that your operation complies with local land use law. We have some example narratives available to help provide a template for people so they don't have to recreate the wheel. And we're available. I say we. There are 5 other inspectors in the state, and we're all involved in trying to help people determine whether or not the rules apply to their operation. So, like to thank you for your time. Here at the bottom is the direct link to the CAFO webpage, and that'll send you into the web spiral of all the information that we try to provide to people. And I know there's a lot there and it's kind of dense, but hopefully, when you have a question, if you can't find one of us immediately, you can find the answers on there. Um, like to thank you and open it up to questions.
Okay, Chris, if you want to stop sharing your screen, you're welcome to do that.
All right.
So that was a pretty short overview of the CAFO program. And I know that there's probably a lot of nuanced questions that you might have about your operation. And that's why we're here today, so that you can get your questions answered. There might be some terminology that Chris used that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so please don't be shy. Just let us know what you need to know, or let us know what you want to know, and we can get those questions answered today. I had a question to just kind of start out, Chris. Um,
Yes, ma'am.
so a lot of smaller, really small scale or micro dairies, we'll just use a goat dairy as an example. Maybe they're operating under a herd share, or maybe they're just selling, a small amount of milk directly to consumers. For those type of operations, I often see that a lot of times they're pasture based, but in the winter they might have a feeding area that's uncovered. They bring their animals in, maybe once a day to milk on just this tiny scale. What might apply to them, if anything?
So runoff from that uncovered area. I mean, that's the big question, right? If we had runoff from an uncovered confinement area, that becomes wastewater. Now, how do we deal with it? Is it through a passive means, allowing it go to a vegetative treatment area, grass filter strips, right? Directing it away from surface water bodies so that it can naturally be treated by the environment is the best and easiest solution, right? Trying to minimize the amount of water that falls on those areas through stormwater diversion, another essential practice. It's why the planning is important, because by looking at your sources and where things would go if it happens, you can plan to make sure you have systems that are in place that are adequate. If we're talking 20 goats, a grass filter strip's probably great. If we're talking 20 cows, maybe there's potential that we have runoff we need to collect. And so, once again, scope, scale, and intensity, the amount of time the animals will be there. All of these things are factors that totally determine how extensive of infrastructure do we need to go. Um, we can always trade infrastructure for elbow grease. And it's just how much effort are we willing to put into making sure that we maintain stormwater diversion and water treatment in a manner so we don't impact anybody else's beneficial uses or our own. I mean, we wouldn't want to end up with groundwater impairment.
So wastewater, if you were to define that, I know that you gave the example of waste and water. So is wastewater on a CAFO anything that is or potentially contaminated with manure?
Yes, man. It's anything we use in the process, right? So it's everything from our plate cooler water on facilities that have to cool the milk and use a heat exchange cooler, because technically we've added heat to the water. Now, generally that water's going into somebody's water trough, right? So it's a non-consumptive use. However, that's an example that we can use. Anything we're using for washing our facility or cleaning our facility, anything for cooling the animals, if we actually use water for cooling. We have some folks that use spray misters, right? Um, Now, generally, those don't create runoff, but they're just part of the whole idea, right? Um, so yeah, it's basically we're generally worried when it's water that's used for moving manure, right? I mean, because the typical example is someplace where the manure needs to be cleaned up, and so we wash down hoses, sprayers, pressure washers. And that's the general situation that we find where people are producing wastewater for us. That or it's cleaning the equipment afterwards.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I think you had mentioned, is there like a basic plan or something like that so that uh, the producer themselves can create their own plan instead of going through the more extensive plan through like NRCS or something.
Yes, sir. That was our minimum required elements document. It's an outline that allows you to go through, and it has the questions basically that need to be addressed in each section of a plan. And it would allow any individual to go out and maybe a little help finding the right references, but you should be able to address the items that it identifies. And even without filling it out completely, have enough information to determine whether these rules would apply to you or not.
And what was that called again?
The minimum required elements document, um, it's posted on our website under planning documents, and so it would. Uh, I've got the reference on my last slide, and so in the recording
Oh,
it's listed there. I
oh,
don't have it on my
It's
hand right now.
it's okay, Chris. I'll send it
Okay,
out to everyone that registered for this webinar. I'll send that link out with the
thank you, ma'am.
required elements. Thank you.
I wanted to just make sure I'm understanding something properly, if I could.
Yes, ma'am.
So first off, thank you. I really appreciate your time today. This has been really enlightening. If we say have a micro dairy, which is our goal, and you're producing less than 100 gallons a day of wastewater, and you have, let's say, 40 goats who are in milk and they are confined for less than 12 hours a day, less than 120 days a year, then at that point, you're not subject to CAFO regulations, but you should still be making best effort to control your little bit of waste you do have. Is that accurate?
Uh, Close. The nuance is
Okay.
you're not required to have a permit. You're still
Okay.
subject to all the regulations because all the rules about do not pollute, don't let stuff go in the water still apply to you, right? But you don't have to go through the formal process and pay for the annual compliance fee and have the permit, because
Okay.
you're operating under the threshold where we feel that your personal responsibility can make sure that you operate appropriately. There's a whole nother program that regulates non-permitted operations. And so there's still a whole nother government program that watches for pollution from small operations, and you don't pay a fee there. And so
Okay.
so this just exempts you from this program. For years we had everybody had to come in because the rules didn't give us an exemption or a way to let people get out. And so as soon as you started talking about, well, we've got to wash up after we milk, or our milking equipment has to be washed, people are like, oh no, you're a CAFO, because the state rule is just really encompassing, right? The guys who write this stuff are genius at trying to make everything fall into the one bucket, right? um
Yeah.
then we got to figure out how to make it all work. And so really it comes down to the producer. And yeah, if you're under the 100 gallons, and here's the thing, even if you confine for the 120 days without the wastewater system, other parts of the rules say you may not require. And so once you're under animal numbers, because you can confine 365 as long as you're under the animal numbers in that table. Okay. The
Okay.
permit
Good.
only starts requiring for numbers greater than that and days than that.
You're
Okay.
making my day. You are making
Okay.
my day.
Okay.
I'm not kidding.
No, I know. And
Is
so, I mean, have a plan that shows your numbers so that when you go to an inspector, they can say, oh, I see your numbers. You're under the 100 gallons. You're under the animal numbers. So until you increase in size and are breaking one of those number barriers, have a good day. Talk to your county land use people to make sure that they're not going to have problems with you, and don't pollute. And so it's as simple as that. And I mean, we can talk about, geez, if you get a system and you have the permit, it's $125 a year to be a CAFO at the small level, right? I've got systems that are IBC totes
yeah.
where people have totes. I mean, it's dictated by what you do. And so no, it's all about where you want to land on the spectrum of stuff. And so if you're smaller than those numbers, Good luck. We love good cheese in this state.
Thank you so much. That was exactly what I needed to know, Chris.
No problem, ma'am. Thank you.
Chris, could you go over maybe calculating the amount of wastewater? How do people know like what they're generating? And then also along the wastewater theme, um, could you give some examples of how people might apply that? I mean, many of us have probably seen the big guns out on larger scale operations, but on a really small scale, what do people do to distribute that wastewater after it's
Oh,
captured?
okay. So, small scale application can be as simple as end of hose. We see some systems where people walk around in the garden area and water individual plants or individual parts of their landscaping. It can be as complicated as sprinklers, or uh, I've got some folks using small travelers. I mean, they're miniature, they're made for doing 5 acres or less. Um, it once again, it's driven by the scale of the operation. Some folks find it real easy because we've got a lot of passive systems, using different spreading devices to use flood type irrigation. Um, so we've got people running perforated bars at the end of the line, with low pressure systems. Um, it once again, it just how much management do they want to put into it? You know, a low pressure system like that, you got to actually move it around to get the distribution, where the sprinkler will spray it out and get it spread in, a lot less time. So once again, how much infrastructure do you want, and how much handwork do you want? And I'm sorry, Melissa, you said distribution. What was the first part of your question?
I was about figuring out do
Oh,
I like the amount of wastewater.
wastewater volumes. So that's totally practice oriented. We got to start with how much does your system produce, and so trying to define how many gallons per minute come out of your system is pretty simple. We can use a 5 gallon bucket and a stopwatch, of course, right? Um, Go ahead, see how long it takes to fill the bucket. Divide by 5, and there's your gallons per minute. You should be able to have a number and then how long you're working to give you your estimates. Other than that, open area, we've got some different climate stations. Usually you can find an average precipitation for your site on different websites, depending on who you go through. That's a great starting point. We recognize there's a specific atlas produced by uh, Oregon Department of what Oregon Department of Transportation, and their weather atlas is just an update of NOAA's weather atlas, more site specific with some websites that didn't make it onto NOAA, I think. And so wherever you get the information, it's an estimate. It's an estimate of the average rainfall so that you can estimate how much runoff might occur off of an uncovered surface, right? And so it's anywhere you go is a good starting point because it at least gives you a number to talk about.
Okay. Back in the day when I worked for the Department of Agriculture, there was a spreadsheet. It was kind of complicated, but is that spreadsheet still available for people to play around
I've
with?
got a copy of it, and I use it all the time. However, we can't swear to the maintenance and upkeep of it because the guy, old Bruce Wilson, has retired from NRCS, and we're still running off of versions from back when we could talk him into updating it for us. If somebody was to come and work with me, that would be the spreadsheet we would go to. Um, I just haven't been distributing it because it's got his name all over it. But it definitely, no, it's the quickest, easiest way. It implements all of the stuff in the Natural Resource Conservation Services Animal Waste Management Field Handbook for sizing facilities. And so it's actually a takeoff from NRCS and just a computerized implementation of one of their procedures. Um, so yeah, I mean, that would be it. If anybody wants to dig deep, that definitely would be the place to go. Um, Ag Waste Management Field Handbook, Appendix 10D, I believe. And that'll give you all the information for trying to design your own manure storages.
Okay.
Um,
But it might be that when we're talking about these really small operations, that they don't need to go to that extent. Is that
no,
correct?
definitely. Oh, definitely not. No, this is just for anybody who wants to nerd out.
Okay. And okay, we do have a question in the chat, and can you share the animal numbers and how that's calculated across a diverse farm? For example, if we have dairy cows and goats and also hogs and poultry for meat, something like
So,
that.
so currently they're doing it by 1,000 pound increments. So take your number of animals times their average weight and divide by 1,000. That gives you how many animal units you have. And if you do that across your species and add them up on the composite farms, we're looking to try and keep that number under 30. Well, that's where the threshold is. So
And that would be is it only for animals that would be confined at any point, or is it for even animals that are 100% pasture based?
if we're talking pasture based, the rules aren't the rules that we're talking about. And so this is the animals in confinement and trying to determine appropriateness of the CAFO rules. And so if they're always on pasture, those animals are on a pasture based system. That's a separate system. And so I could see it either way. It depends on how you operate, right?
Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing anyone else, so we will wrap this up. I really appreciate your time today, Chris, and I appreciate the time for everyone that gathered today to learn more about the program. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to your local livestock water quality specialists. I know that sometimes there's some apprehension there because this is the regulatory agency, but one thing that we are trying to do is just put a person's face behind all of the black and white rules and that we have to follow in the state and try to understand, that each farm is different. And the inspectors know that, and they really do want to try to help. We love good cheese, as Chris said.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone.